Welcome to all those attending this evening's Pension Committee meeting and those watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Stuart Mathers and I will be chairing this meeting. Details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda and copies of which are accessible online underneath the live broadcast. At the end of the public part of the meeting, the committee will move to discuss any confidential matters. The live broadcast on YouTube will be cut and members of the public present in the room will be asked to leave. A little bit of housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm goes off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. And also a polite reminder to please switch off any mobile devices to silent before the meeting starts. Online housekeeping for those who are joining us via Teams. Some important online housekeeping for those attending. Please ensure any mobile phones around you are silent, that you keep your microphone muted when not speaking, and only one person may speak at a time, as I, as chairperson, will call those to speak. Finally, a reminder to everyone speaking today that your voice will only be audible online if your microphone is switched on and the red button is indicating. So we're going to go through part one of the agenda. Are there any apologies for absence?
So we don't have any apologies for absence from members of the committee this evening. We have an apology from Roger Hackett as chair of the Pension Board, and it's also noted that Councillor Riley is currently not present.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting? No? Okay. The minutes dated the 8th of June. Are we happy to agree those as accurate? Agreed? Great. Thank you. And just to confirm that the items in part one are considered in public and those in part two are considered in private. So we're going to move on to item 5, the administration report.
Thank you, Chair. Key headlines in the report include performance, which remains at 100% across all KPIs, and the portal sign-up, which continues to grow and is now at 37.5%, which is 6.5% higher than at the time of leaving Surrey. This is the time of year which also sees the issue of the annual benefit statements, and currently we are at 98.69% of active statements being issued and 100% of deferred statements being issued. The Hampshire team continues to chase employers for missing data to achieve full issuance of the active statement. The inherited backlog continues to clear down, and we are now at over 50% of the items cleared. I would like to highlight to committee that the relationship with Hampshire continues to be constructive and proactive, and I have only positive comments to make in terms of the administration partnership. We have Andy on the call, so I'll pass back to committee so they may ask him any questions. Thank you.
Andy, would you like to make any comments before we ask any questions?
That number has now reduced during September to 1921, so it just continues that further work of bringing that backlog down.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? No. I guess the only one I have is I think it's a good pace in terms of the backlog. I've always been very impressed with that. It would be useful to know if you think, and I know it's sometimes employer dependent, but when you think we would eventually get through this backlog. I know that probably the final ones will be the trickiest.
Yeah, certainly the final ones will be, fairly tricky. So I think we are still some way away from getting through the backlog. As you see, we started at 4,000. We're pretty much 2 years into our relationship now, and we've kind of reduced that by half. And I think, as you highlight, that would have been certainly some of the easier pickings as we started that work. So I think we've still got some way to go. I think, James, you may have had more detailed conversation with the team directly in terms of the perceived the kind of anticipated timeline? Have you got something in your mind that the team have said to you around that?
There's no specific timeline. We're just continuing to work through the cases, but again, a lot of it is just dependent on employers playing ball, really. And I think the Hampshire team are sort of contacting people, but the progress is slowed down by the sort of the speed of responses by employers. Although we are having meetings with one of the key payroll providers of the employers who sort of do the payroll for many schools and academies. So we are actually having sort of regular meetings with them to help boost their performance in terms of helping Hampshire resolve some of these queries. But I don't think we've actually got a proper deadline in place, or no indication really. We're just sort of continuing to work through, probably at sort of the pace we are, but hoping to clear more and more as the employers hopefully start to sort of get more on board.
May I ask a question on McLeod, probably in Roger's absence, but so it speaks about the effective date being the 1st of October, which is next week or this weekend, and the government hasn't responded. Do we have any idea of what the picture is, James or Andy? I might be asking you to predict something that's not, able to be done.
Yeah, no, some more clarity now that the government have responded to the final part of the consultation. So we are aiming to be able to process some McLeod cases on the 1st of October. Certainly retirements under the age of 65, where they're fairly straightforward. I feel we should be able to progress those on your behalf. We've got further work with our software provider. So for age over 65 retirements, we would hope to have that software in at the end of October to start processing those cases. And then there's further work that we need to do with our software supplier for the remaining kind of more difficult cases. I don't think we'll get our software fixed until the start of next year, if I'm honest. But we make good progress. We feel we're in a relatively good place, both where we are, but compared to where we know others are. So we feel as confident as we can be that we can start to progress those cases now on your behalf and on behalf of the other partners that we work with.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? No? In that case, can I move that we note the administration update and the active and deferred benefit statement update within the report? Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Please don't feel that you had to stay on, Andy, for the meeting.
Okay, good to see you, and I hope your rest of your meeting goes well. Thank you.
So the next item is item 6. This is part 1. We will be discussing this more in private towards the end of the meeting. But James.
Thank you. Performance over the quarter was positive at 1.08%, but behind the benchmark by 0.55%. Longer term 3 and 5 year figures are also positive at 3.95% return and 2.83% return respectively. However, both fall short of the return required in the funding strategy statement, which is set at 4.1%. The value of investments as at the end of June was 1.194 billion, which remains the same as at today's date. We checked it today and there hasn't been sort of very little movement since the end of June. However, as we've discussed before, it's not all about sort of investment value, and we need to consider liabilities and the funding level. And this is my nice segue into introducing our new funding level reporting facility we have with Hymans Robertson. The new tool updates the valuation inputs and allows us to run an interim funding level at any point. So we've done that in the graph, and as you can see that since the triennial valuation in March 2022, where we were at 88%, there's been a steady increase, and we're now 114% funded as of August 2023. Again, of course, there's a note of caution before we get too excited. This is just a moment in time, and this figure will fluctuate. So it will go up and down as the market environment around it changes. In terms of the asset allocation, we're sort of, as always, underweight infrastructure whilst we wait for the commitments to be drawn, and this is offset by the overweight in the absolute return fund with rougher. Market movements have seen positive impact on equity values and reduction in bond values, which has led to a respective sort of over and underweight in those asset classes. We may want to discuss in conjunction with the Part 2 paper. In the meantime, I'll sort of pass back for any questions that committee may have in the meantime.
Are there any questions? I just make the point that the Outlook section on page 31 is particularly helpful, and it does talk about the opportune time to consider our risks and asset classes, etc., which is very timely with our strategy that we'll be discussing in part 2. So that's, well, hopefully timings all match up, but I'm not going to get involved in timings. I'll leave that to the experts. If there are no questions, are we happy to note that report? Is that agreed? Okay. Item 7, investments update, responsible investments update. Apologies.
Thank you. Along with the normal voting information and updates from Legal and General and LAP, the highlight of this report is to say that Hillingdon Fund has once again met the criteria to be approved as a signatory to the UK Stewardship Code. I think it is only ourselves and Lambeth in London who've achieved this status, and many London funds are not even considering applying. This report does again highlight the areas of the report does again highlight areas of improvement which probably need to be considered now if we are to maintain this status next year. However, in saying that, and although it's a fantastic achievement, I would like to ask committee for their thoughts on continuing with this endeavour, bearing in mind the costs, time and resources required versus the benefits we receive. And maybe we need to have, I don't know, I'm just asking if there's a different approach we may want to take going forward. But with that, I'll pass back for any questions.
Before we go to questions, if I can just express my thanks again to James, the team, the wider officers and those who have supported in this submission. The feedback was extremely insightful, asking for more examples that we know we have. So it's a very useful bit of feedback from the Stewardship Code. If there are any questions or if people would like to start discussing how we'd like to move forward.
Just going to ask, I mean, it is a good achievement and well done and everything, but you said it's the cost, the time, etc. Can you give us an outline of the time that you put into it, or people put into it?
It's not just us, it's the committee members as well. So obviously we have numerous meetings with the committee to discuss values and beliefs and assess that. You fill in questionnaires as well, which then feeds into the stewardship report. We then have to contact all the committee members, make sure everything's up to date. All the information that ISIO do, they contact all the fund managers, do impact assessments and all the fund managers, etc. So again, that takes days, I imagine, if not longer, weeks, probably to do all this analysis. So, and I don't know the exact cost off my head, but we're probably looking. Well, I'm not sure we can actually say the cost because it's in public, so it's probably commercially sensitive. But yeah. It's not cheap, but there's an awful lot of effort, and everybody recognises it's a high bar to meet. And even I was at a meeting last week, and the local government association sort of said, this is you're doing really well to do this, and not everybody's doing it because it is an awful lot of work, and it's a lot of work ongoing each year, every year.
Andrew?
Yeah, I'd maybe just add to agree with that. So I think back to the process. So this is the second year the fund has gone through that cycle of work and been approved. I think when we had the discussion at the time, the first year was a lot of work in terms of there was less to do in the second year. So the way to think about it's made up of different building blocks, and all those building blocks needed to be done in the first year. I would say something like 60 or 70% of them needed to be done in the second year, so it's not a kind of full refresh. But James is right that over time, it's not as if the work kind of tails off and then it becomes just a kind of maintaining status. There's a significant amount of work to do each year. And I think as the committee changes over time, the original blocks need to be refreshed as well, so in terms of beliefs and belief statements, etc. So the way to think about it is a lot of work. The only thing I would say is that with TCFD incoming, and we don't know the timescale for that, but we do know that it's very likely that it'll be implemented for LGPS. There is a bit of overlap, so some of those elements will be needed for TCFD. So if the decision is made to not follow the Stewardship Code, there'll still be a requirement to do a couple of those building blocks for TCFD. And I guess the other way to look at it is that because of that overlap, it kind of not reduces the workload, but it shares it between the two kind of regulatory bodies.
Can I suggest that we discuss the cost and merits a little bit more in our budget item in part 2, just to allow members and officers to speak more freely? Is everybody happy with that? Yeah. Is there any other comments on this item? Are we happy to note the various aspects, the ESG activities, compliance, the stewardship code submission, and the LAFT activities? Is that noted? Agreed? Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the risk register, item 8.
There's been no changes to the risk register this quarter. However, I have updated the commentary around Pen 11, the failure in the pool in management of funds and access to funds. This is in light of the consultation which mentions pools needing to be £50 billion minimum in size. Currently the LSIF is smaller than this and may even struggle to get to £50 billion. But based on conversations we've had, we do not think the LSIF will be forced to close down, and so the rating remains the same. In addition, the launch of the Value Fund has been delayed. However, LSIF are confident this will still take place. On the personnel front, Jason Fletcher, Chief Investment Officer at the CIV, is leaving. But the CIV have advised that this will not affect investment management in the intervening period whilst they look for a replacement. So I've updated the risk register noting those items but kept the risk the same. So I'm happy to discuss them for committee to overlay with their assessment and thoughts.
Are there any questions? Okay. I have a few points. I totally missed the resignation in my flicking through this. Pen 12, I wondered if it would be worth adding the, I don't know if it's explicitly in here, the work that's being done with the audit committee, internal audit, because I think that will add some real strength. And actually, part of the governance strength or mitigation of risk is the good working and I think critical friend relationship with the pension board. I know some pensions don't have, or pension funds don't have that, but I hope, unless I'm just projecting a good image onto those board members who are here, but it's there is dialogue and there is challenge, and also for those pension board members who are present, feel free to bring in questions as you wish. We do welcome yourselves and your input, but I think that might, although it may not change the risk level, I think it's worth noting. And on Pen 13, I know there are items coming later on when we look at business planning, etc., and succession, etc. I wonder if this has more of around key officer risk, if this has a little bit more of an in-depth review and thinking for our next meeting, because looking at some of the suggestions and the priorities that are ahead of us when it comes to kind of the, I know there are strengths to the team that work with this, but in terms of key officer, we're still relying on one or two, and so I know there are other bits and pieces in the pipeline, and officers are always working to mitigate these risks, but I don't think it needs to be changed in category now, but I think it's something to keep an eye on a little bit more closely, if I may, just to make those comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, you'll see later on in the committee we talk about the budget and an underspend on staffing, and some of the work we've done there relates to a vacant post. So just for a committee to know that Tunde Adekoya, who's a pension fund accountant, who sort of been working pensions for many years, has been promoted to finance manager, pensions and governance. So what we're doing is sort of promoting Tunde to sort of take on some more work and sort of shadow me slightly more, to have that contingency for me, and then whilst also then employing somebody new in the trainee pension fund accountant type role to sort of take over Tunde. So you've got that double layer of accountancy knowledge with Tunde and the new person, and the double layer of knowledge with myself and Tunde as well. So we are working in terms of that contingency planning.
I think it's those things that make me feel the risk is adequate. But if members do want to talk about specific staffing aspects, then we can talk about that in part 2 through the budget. But in terms of risk, I don't have any concerns that it needs to be a higher risk than it currently is. But I think it's something that we need to continually monitor because of the size of the staff team, and they work extremely hard. Are there any other comments or thoughts? So are we happy to accept the risk register? Great. agreed. Okay. Governance report, item 9.
Yeah, we've got quite a few items on this governance paper, including a training update for pensions committee members, and I would sort of just ask for the minutes that we ask that Councillor Riley advises when he's completed his Aon sessions and all the knowledge and skills there, and send that on and update the training log in that regard. We have a new work plan layout, which hopefully allows members to see what work is going to be done and required on an ongoing basis. So hopefully that's slightly more clear and sort of gives a fuller picture. As always, we welcome any suggestions to complement the plan. So if any committee member wants to add something to the suggested plan, please advise us. Committee should note that the internal audit has taken place regarding the effectiveness of the pension committee. The terms of reference were on the shared drive for committee members, and I've had the exit meeting with internal audit. They're preparing the final report now, and internal audit are happy to present that paper at the December committee. Also, I'm requesting a slight amendment to the pension discretions policy in terms of ill health strain costs. Previously, it was not clear that if an employer went against the recommendations of an independent medical practitioner and decided to award ill health, even if the medical practitioner said not to, as to when the pension strain costs, so the cost of paying the pension early, would be paid. So this now clearly defines that if they do go against the medical practitioner, they need to pay those strain costs up front, and they're not sort of just absorbed in the funding level. Lastly, committee will be aware that it's been some time we've been waiting for the official issue of the Pensions Regulator General Code and the Scheme Advisory Board Good Governance Framework. We still haven't received anything officially. However, assumptions can be made on the draft and the consultation and the information that we know. So Claire, in her expanded role, has provided a governance update and made an assessment of areas which the committee should address. The Pension Board has reviewed the report and we're happy for it to be considered by committee as well. The full report is attached, and we will work through the items based on their priority. The first relates to training, and we aim to undertake the needs assessment for the committee to understand what training needs are required and develop a specific training policy for the committee. Also, since Claire did most of the heavy lifting on this report, if I may, I'd like to pass over to Claire to add her comments.
Thanks, James. What I hope the paper shows is some of the logic behind how the priorities that we're suggesting have been derived, giving you a flavour for the good governance report from the Scheme Advisory Board, giving you a flavour of the new Regulator General Code. As we know it at the moment, it's only in draft at the moment, and that those two pieces of work is obviously going to put more scrutiny and expectation on the fund. But I think the priorities are also determined by what really it should be the priority from the fund, what are the needs of the fund as well. So on page 79 of the pack, we've outlined what we think should be the first areas of priority in terms of developing the governance aspects, some of which were already started. So, for example, the business plan is on your agenda for later. Training, looking at resource, investment monitoring, and cyber, because it's one of the highest risks as well. So those are the priorities, and we've discussed this with the board a couple of months ago as well. And then medium priorities to follow. I think what we need to do is keep these under review, as and when the general code comes out from the regulator, which could be any time. We just don't know what timing that will be. It was supposed to be spring of this year. It's not come out yet. But once it does come out, we'll need to start looking at the precise details of the code, because at the moment, as you'll see in one of the appendices, it's not necessarily clear which parts of the code are going to be applicable to the LGPS. It's going to be a code for the whole of the pensions industry, and the specifics to the LGPS are would be some will apply, some won't apply, some might be best practice or recommended. So we'll need to review that, but I think we'll be coming back with regular updates on that. So I'm happy to take any questions on some of the priorities, and looking forward to, as we look at the training area in particular, and you'll know that through our discussions about the consultation, the government's consultation on pooling, it does specifically talk about training policies, etc. So that is on the government's radar as well. And with that, we'll also consider the internal audit outcomes as well, which should be coming out soon. So happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? If I may. So the training policy is under medium, and I know, and cyber, I know some work's been done by the pension board, do quite a lot, and we've had quite a lot of those conversations. So I assume these are high priority and things that we have to work through, not necessarily what has the greatest risks. Is that fair?
On the training side, I think your policy is broadly okay, so it's not necessarily the policy that needs to be changed. It's actually the implementation and the planning of training sessions and looking at what we've done so far and how effective it's been and what's the next steps for a training plan as opposed to the policy. That's the thinking behind that. And the cyber is just that it's the highest risk on the risk register. There's been a lot of work done. There are elements of the new code that are going to cover cyber as well, so it's just making sure we just keep checking, looking at those checks and balances.
I think this is a really helpful piece of work, and it definitely started lining up some things in my mind when looking through the I love tables, by the way, but particularly looking through the tables and the priorities, and I'm looking forward to building that into the business plan, so thank you. Are there any other comments? We do appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I had one, on the internal audit. It spoke about councillors getting questionnaires, etc. Do internal audit want any more feedback, or are they just writing reports at the moment?
They sent out 5 questionnaires. They got 3 back. I think they sent numerous reminders. But it's anonymous, so I don't know who filled out the questionnaires. I don't know who didn't fill out the questionnaires. So, I mean, maybe internal audit do, but I don't know. But I know they sent out lots of questionnaires and lots of reminders. So at some point they have to cut it off, and now they've cut off, so they're not asking for any more feedback. They're just working on the three responses they got, and they're creating the report now. So it's just getting signed off by the head of internal audit, and we should have the actual final report soon.
Thank you for those that contributed. So are we happy to note those items? Yeah. It says here suggestions for future agendas and working practices, etc. We've got those predominantly in the report. Do you need anything further?
It's only a thing or something that needs adding, but it's quite comprehensive. The new plan is quite.
I mean, my suggestion to members would be, if you do have thoughts, suggestions on agenda items and practices, that you contact officers so that we can get those added and considered. It should be a live and moving feast, and nothing stays still in the investment market, so we wouldn't expect that in the work programme of the Pensions Committee. Okay. Have to note and agree the governance update and approve and update pensions only discretions policy. That's important that we do that. Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you. So that moves us into part 2 of our meeting. We've now finished the public part of our meeting. The committee will shortly move into a private session and discuss matters that are confidential in nature. The YouTube broadcast will come to an end, and we kindly ask that any members of the public present leave the room. Thank you for those attending and watching online.